Today on the show, we have a special guest, and I say this, all my guests are special, but this is one of my favorite directors, and we're just going to get right into it. I have Mark Pellington here, film director, writer, documentary filmmaker. Do I tack on editor? Is there anything that you don't do?
I don't bust tables or serve in the UN. No, I think any filmmaker kind of I prefer a filmmaker to director because I think filmmakers do everything, and depending on the size of the project or the size of the piece you're doing, you have to then wear different hats.
I look at you, and I know you say filmmaker, but I just see creative. You know, because if anybody out there that's following you on social media, they're looking at your photos, they're looking at all your samples of your creativity, and you know, how has that been during this whole process? You know, with what's going on with COVID, working remotely.
It's funny. I just haven't posted it yet. I'm getting ready to post a couple of little short tests, black and white film tests that I did, not film. We call them film tests, even though they're digital, that I just made because I had this DP who was like, let's go shoot some. I said, you know, this is my next movie. I'm really thinking about shooting in black and white. I'd like to go shoot some tests. And I shot them and end up writing a little monologue and then another one, and I get some actors, and next thing I know, I've got like 7 actors, shoot for 8 hours and give it to my editor, and he makes a great thing, and then I get an idea. Next thing I know, I'm like, come on, is this like a proof of concept for a hybrid fiction, nonfiction show? I don't know. And it just came out of like, I wanted to go shoot something. I hadn't made anything for a while. And so I find that I like writing, I like developing, I like building, kind of using this time to build a stockpile of scripts. That was really the goal, is to build the stockpile of small movies that I could do. And sure enough, some of them are kind of COVID safe, maybe, that I think I could go out into the world to try to make. And other times, like if I don't make something in about 2 weeks, my brain starts to go crazy, even if it's a little collage on my phone that I post, you know what I mean? So, yeah, I keep constantly busy.
I may sound like a broken record from prior shows, but you know, I've had a musician tell me once that, you know, creativity is like a faucet; it's always on. Do you feel like that's always your process? You just have a flow?
I think at this age, at 58, I know myself pretty well, and I know what my unconscious, intuitive, creative process is. And reading a feature script and kind of seeing it for like, is this something I want to pursue, versus listening to a piece of music. Like this weekend, I listened to a piece of music for a music video. And I went through my normal process. But what you learn is just because it's your first instinct doesn't mean it's a good idea, because sometimes you can kind of like, you can fall into rhythms of things you see. So you need to read it and challenge yourself. And with a lot of times with music videos, I listen to a song and I just see what comes out. And then I edit from the head, you know, let just stream of consciousness from the heart, edit from the head. And also, it depends on who's involved in the process. Like if the record company, you know, I'm less, how to put it this way, I'm less patient with a low budget music video where, you know, I'm not going to really get paid. And if I'm doing it for almost no money and it's creative, I kind of need to have the, you know, sorry, I need to kind of have the creative control. And I don't want to jump through a lot of hoops and a lot of, you know, stuff. So my process changes, and but my ability to do what it takes to go get the job, sometimes I find I'm less patient for than I used to be.
Yeah, I mean, I get that. Do you get a lot of musicians that come to you and say, hey, could you help us create? I mean, how do you collaborate?
Well, on Thursday, I don't know when you're going to run this or if you're running it now. Um, on Thursday, a video I just made for a band called Not a Surf is going to premiere. And there's some little teases out on social media now. And it's a 10-minute music film. Because I look at them as films. I don't look at them as videos anymore, because after doing enough movies and TV shows and long form stuff, a 2 minute, yeah, it could be a 2 minute thing, but if it could be something longer, more expansive for the music and the ideas, why not? So Not a Surf, the lead singer Matthew and I collaborated on this little 10-minute music film that has spoken word meditations from his father that he had recorded years ago and other imagery. And I'm really proud of it. We made it super cheap. Ended up shooting him in England, sent a cameraman to him in England. I shot 2 nights here in LA with a drone operator and another person, and then had this kid, Jimmy Daniel, shoot some stuff for me in Sydney because he was a little protege. And I'm like, do you want to go shoot something? He's like, sure. He ended up shooting 3 days. So we ended up shooting in 3 continents for $5,000, which is really cheap. But the editor and I, we had a lot of time to work on it. And it's probably my favorite video since my Imagine Dragons video a couple of years ago, in terms of just like the reach. And so I love doing them. And because videos are very free, and Matthew was very open, he was very supportive. But at the end of the day, when you're doing a video for an artist and it says Not a Surf, at the end of the day, that's their piece, their song is the thing that has to have the final word. And we were on the same page, which is really good. But if I said I want to make a short film called Joystick, and I want to get a song from an artist, then I would have the final word. Do you know what I mean? Because it's like, but hopefully you don't have to get into final words. But again, when you have 2 people, creativity is a very singular form, and you want to go. Brian wants to go make something, and like anytime the minute money is exchanged, I don't care if it's $50 or $50 million, it changes the equation. So unless you're really doing your thing for yourself for free, it becomes a different kind of interpretive experience.
I can relate to that, because I just recently had a project where the clients came to us and said, well, we want you involved in directing. To me, that just opened up the door. I'm like, okay, I can really shape this and wow the client. And I think just as of recently, I'm starting to kind of wrap my head around of like, you're not just being hired for labor, you're being hired for a creative, and let's capitalize on that. I do like those projects that come up, every other project. But to kind of talk about the messaging, to go back in time, Pearl Jam's Jeremy, that video resonates with so many different levels and different messages, and talking about a reach. And I mean, it still speaks nowadays. Do you ever look back on some of your music videos, your films, and think about the positive impacts or the messaging that come across and still resonates nowadays?
Sure. I think that first I'll start specifically with that one. We on my website, markpellington.com, which has everything. I just added tons and tons of new material. A lot of it in a section called The Vault. I'm doing like old MTV pieces. I mean, I must have added 6 hours of new material, historical vintage stuff. Almost every music video I've made is on there. There's a few that are missing that I still have to put on there, because I like to share the work. The only thing that's really not on there are the full feature films. There's like TV pilots, documentaries, everything. And we had added because recently Pearl Jam remastered the visuals and remixed the song for Jeremy. So now they've made it kind of HD quality, as opposed to all videos before 2008 were kind of pre-HD. So when you look at old videos on YouTube, stuff from the 80s and even early 90s looks kind of soft, right? But when you look at videos now after, that period, they're sharper, they're HD. So they went and took the original materials, not the film materials, but they took the kind of the highest end, you know, and made a compressed new visually remastered copy, which was a really great way. And they put the uncensored version, which had never seen the light of day other than my website. So there's an uncensored version of the video, and that video works for many levels. One, it was prescient and ahead of its time in terms of, let's say, school alienation, youth alienation, and guns. In the video, he kills himself in his classroom, yet the misconstrued, censored version ended up being misinterpreted that he shot his classmates. So the reason that Pearl Jam stopped making videos was they were tired of this, their work being misinterpreted. So now, even though everybody knew really what the story was, it was still, every year I'd get a call or emails or people like, why did he shoot his classmates? Or there would be a really negative assignment of responsibility to that video that encourages school shooting. And again, this was 7 years before Columbine, well before the spate in the last 10 years of terrible, gun violence. So the reason that video stays on one level is the issue that was surrounding it. Secondarily, the classic archetypal youth, young teen, alienated, disconnected from friends, bullied, disconnected from parents, isolated, is back to literature, is a classic archetype of youth music, rebellion. You couldn't, whether Jeremy went hand in hand with Smells Like Teen Spirit as this kind of emblematic, early 90s kind of like reaction against the Reagan's complacency and America moving into nostalgia. It was really the last whiff of rock and roll anger. And that classic kind of kid who doesn't know what's going on stayed. So I would talk to bands over the years, early 2000s, 2008, 2016, and the singer of the band would be like, I was 8 when Jeremy came out, or I was 15 when Jeremy came out. And it really spoke to me. Now, what spoke to them and what still speaks to people is that song is a classic cinematic rise and fall with a great catharsis. It's a great rock song that still gives you chills. And so the song is timeless. The depiction of his reaction in it still holds up because it works on that emotional level. And, it's one of the few, a lot of my videos I think hold up, but that one, when something like that moves into such iconic status, you don't take responsibility for it. You just say, I was the guy who did that song at that time. The same way filmmakers get to do a certain script at a certain time. People get to interpret a book at a certain time. There's things that last as art that forever kind of capture that moment, yet speak to future moments.
To segue into something a little bit on the same note, but a little bit lighthearted, the music and the music videos, your body of work, I've noticed throughout the years has been very diverse. And so, I asked earlier if there's been any projects where they asked you for creative or any passion projects. There's a band that I like, the band Sacred Reich. Lo and behold, you produced and directed a video for them. What was the involvement with that? Was that more of a passion project?
The first two that I did in 1990, early 90s, 92 maybe, 91, 92, did Independent, and then another song called Low. And that was early on their career. And my friend who worked for their record company said, hey, we've got this speed metal band. Do you want to work with them? And I heard the track and I really liked it. And so over the years, I stayed in touch with Phil Rind, the singer, became friends with him, stayed friends with him through many, life changes and permutations, and they had broken up, and then they were broken up for many, many years. So when they resurfaced a few years ago, we're doing new music and new touring, I said, Phil, let's go. Let's work together again. So we did 3 videos from Awakenings, their new record. And so that's, 28-year difference of time, 27 years. And he and I literally spoke to him last week. He and I are dear friends, and I love them, and I love the pieces we made for them recently, especially Manifest Reality with these weird, strange, beautiful dance movements. So who would ever think that you do a dance film with Sacred Reich's music? Again, no money, totally low budget, but those are joyful experiences.
I had to throw that one out there because I'm like, out of all the bands, it's one of my favorites. But I'm like, wow, Mark Pellington got behind them and made several videos. So I'm like, okay, that must be interesting. So I segue into this now. Working at MTV. When was that kind of realization, that light bulb that went off and said, you know what, I need to go into a different avenue. I need to start doing more and challenging myself and getting involved in films and documentary. When was that key moment for you?
Look, anybody grows. I started at MTV as an intern, and I was 20 years old, 21 years old. Then you move to a production assistant. Then you're start to make stuff, and then associate producer. So I was at MTV was really my film school, my training ground. New York in the 80s, from 83 to 90 was really where I began to see the world, look around, and be exposed to art and culture, and whether it was hip hop or punk rock or art or whatever it was, that was what I was gobbling up in my 20s, right? So you start doing videos on the weekends, but like anything, like any relationship, I'd done this show called Buzz, which was a half-hour film TV show, and 1991 came, and I was like, well, I'm going to leave MTV because I had done what I needed to do at MTV. It was time to leave the nest, which is pretty natural for the people that came of age in their 20s, right? So then you venture out on your own, and I've been on my own ever since, meaning like I've never had a job other than the job that I have. So challenging yourself to get to narrative or spoken word films or poetry films or documentaries, then movies and TV was a natural kind of evolution and form in terms of just stuff becoming longer, becoming more interested in storytelling as much as collage and image, learning about character and narrative drive and screenwriting, and learning about TV and storytelling form, which is very different in TV than it is in music videos. But then you start to get older and you can start to apply one to the other, and like, well, wait a second, I don't need to. And you find yourself shooting in a way that's very free and intuitive, and you start to bring some of those techniques or ideas or manners of directing to movies the same way you do it, and vice versa. You bring storytelling to a music video, and they're like, what? Like, yeah, I can't help but think about story, even if it's abstract. Here's a good example. Bruce Springsteen. So 2002, for The Rising, we're doing Lonesome Day. So I meet Bruce, and we're talking about the Jersey Shore and Alzheimer's, and his wife's dad had Alzheimer's, my dad had Alzheimer's. Talk about being parents, Jersey Shore. We talked for an hour about everything other than doing a video. I end up working with him. And he goes, well, I want it to be a story, but I don't want it to be a story. And I said, I know what you mean. So you can have a 3-act structure. You can have a beginning, middle, and an end. You can have a first act. So for Lonesome Day, we said, okay, the first act is struggle and darkness, and people are confined. And then the middle act is breaking through that struggle and finding some light and getting some motion and movement. And the third act is, hope and moving forward and light over dark. So it's literally, we shot for 10 hours of footage over 3 days, and every image could be like act 1, act 2, act 3. So you realize you started assigning a narrative structure to abstract imagery, and that's very natural for me. Right? So I can interpret struggle in any number of ways. You just say, well, give me the word, my brain can start to visualize both human, unhuman. How do you do struggle with light? Okay, that's a light pushing away. There's any number of ways that your brain can interpret, and sometimes narrative, plot-driven narrative with actors talking, people talking, becomes a very, very different beast than the free-form nature of a music video or something a little more abstract, where it's a little more interpretive and it's not so plot-driven. So working on those things with Bruce, for example, I had brought my experience of doing some movies at that point. I understood what 3 acts were. I understood the rise and fall of traditional storytelling structure, which you can then break. And if you know the rules, you can break them. And then you could decide later on to say, I'm going to experiment and try something completely different because A, you're bored, B, you want to challenge yourself, C, the artist has demanded that you do. So sometimes you're mixing poetry and photographic portraiture and spoken word and music video. Sometimes you're mixing narrative and documentary techniques with, experimental film techniques. Sometimes you're doing a plot-driven video. Each thing is different, so you're kind of you're a musician playing different notes. You're a chef cooking different things, trying different things. And the ultimate arbiter, the ultimate goal is to create something that satisfies you and the person that you're collaborating with or for.
Agree with what a lot of your sentiments and what you're saying, and to kind of go back to throw it back to your MTV comments. I had a brief time at MTV, and it kind of inspired me. It was almost like boot camp of production. I was a production assistant at AP, and I left there to do other things. I was at a key point where MTV was kind of starting to embrace documentary films or docuseries and sports, and that inspired me to go my route with my career. But to go back to what you were saying, about writing and creating a narrative and working with Bruce, do you often find that your creative freedom comes from either being a writer or a director, or do you find this in edit, a little bit more creative freedom? Because it resonates for me in all 3 different avenues, but I'm just kind of curious, where do you find your creative freedom, to be involved in a project?
It's very rare that there's not creative freedom. So even if the most restrictive might be not restrictive, but a commercial, and there's plenty of commercials on my site. There's a perfect example. There's a lot of 2-minute or minute and a half long director's cuts of commercials, which are basically slightly longer versions of the commercials, which I usually do or oversee. Other than a commercial that you just go shoot and the agency takes over and edits it for you, you're pretty much, it's your baby. TV pilots, you do your cut, and then you're collaborating with the studio and the executive producers about what that version is. But for example, Blind Spot, when I did the TV pilot for that, the director's cut and what aired were very, very, very similar. So anytime you're an artist that's been entrusted to deliver, being involved, even if you didn't write it, being involved in shaping it, your job as a filmmaker is to shape and interpret the words and images, or the brief of the commercial, or the storyboard, or the track. Your job is to interpret it. And big editing is interpreting. I mean, I don't know any great filmmaker that doesn't also, that isn't heavily involved in the editing and the sound design and the sound. Now, some might just like, for example, I know that Spike Lee just did that Utopia, the David Byrne piece, right? My friend shot it, 12 cameras. So there's a existing show, shoot it with 12 cameras, give it to a great editor. Like, the directing of that is very different than a single camera 90-minute film or a 30-second commercial. Each one is its own construction. But I find creativity in everything, you know? So if it's not creative, you're like, boy, it's got to be pretty dry and pretty, you know, but that's also like your editing. There's only so many ways you can edit sometimes a 30-second commercial. You're like, okay, like, got it. Here's 5 versions of it. Like, what you're, now we're beating a dead, you know, we're beating the moisture out of any project.
I've spoken to other directors on the show and off the show, and also, you know, being on set, and some directors, you know, when they're working with talents, especially again certain celebrities, you know, they don't direct them. They just let them do their thing on camera. And so that's why I was kind of curious of, you know, do you feel comfortable with everybody that you work with, that they do their own thing? That's what they're hired to do. They're hired because of that personality and what they bring to the table.
The director is the answer man. The director is the answer person, woman, man, whatever. Like, the director, your job is to be the final arbiter of and creative decisions in collaboration with others, whether it's the agency, the studio, the band, the record company, the subject of the documentary. Your job is to, so casting, yeah, you're involved, and you could have disagreements or agreements about casting in a commercial. In a movie, it's like very much who you are as a filmmaker is determining whether certain actors want to do the movie or not. You know, like last week, an actor passed on a script because it was like, it was basically, I wasn't like the hot guy. But the point is this: whether you're working with Shirley MacLaine or John Hamm or Dan Reynolds from Imagine Dragons, or an unknown kid in a TV pilot, to a 14-year-old in a commercial, to an extra on a TV show, to Richard Gere, you have to direct them. They all want to be directed. Now, certain people you leave alone, because in casting them, they do their thing, but no one wants to be left alone. But the key, and I've learned over the years, is not over direct. I directed James Earl Jones in a TV show years ago, and I want to give him one note. I should have said, James, slow down between these 2 big monologues, right? That's all I need to say. Is like, I must have talked for 5 minutes. I wanted to hear myself talk. I thought directing was talking. Directing is not talking. Directing is listening. So every time I do a movie, anytime I talk to an actor, I say, what's your process? And here's a good piece of advice for you. What's your process? How do you work? What's best for you? What's been your best experience in working with a filmmaker? What's been your worst experience? Because you've got to do that with 5 different actors. On my first movie, somebody needed a kick in the ass, somebody needed a hug, somebody needed a pat on the back, somebody needed to be controlled, somebody needed to be left alone, who likes to rehearse at different times. Like, your job is juggling psychologically people that are like your children, right? So, I mean, that is half of the battle, is eliciting performance and maximizing people's comfort level. Yet other times you'd want an actor to be uncomfortable. You want them to sit there and you don't tell them a thing, and you're like, yeah, I'm not going to say anything, and I'm going to see what they do. And I can tell they're a little nervous, and maybe they're even a little pissed but I'm going to roll the camera because I want to shake them up. Because I found myself looking and they're like falling into patterns and saying the same shit all the time. And I'm like, come on, let's just do something different.
Yeah.
So each one is different, but no actor. It's easy to cast somebody in a commercial or a movie and they do it and they're sitting there like, well, that's easy as shit because like that makes everybody look good, and sometimes it's easy, sometimes it's hard.
With that in mind, trying to get emotions out, trying to get the best of people, and again, working with so much talent, I'm kind of curious because there's one movie that I mean, when I saw it, it was so impactful. I Melt with You. How was that movie as far as directing? Was it challenging? Was there anything as far as that speaks out still about being involved in that movie?
That movie was a huge breakthrough on many levels because despite the amount of hatred given to that movie on its release and since then, it's also achieved kind of a little cult thing. Um, that movie is not for everybody. That movie is decidedly not for everybody. It's very dark. It's very specific in terms of its experience. We made that movie for no money. We made the movie on small, tiny 5D cameras, which back then in 2010, 2011 were like radical. So now anybody can go take a Blackmagic or an A7S or a little stripped down A Minima, or just anybody can take a little stripped down, little strip it down to a little red, you know what I mean? Put a prime lens on it. And, but back then that was very new and shooting with very little light. The entire crew was 13 people. All the gear fit in one cube van. There was no motorhomes. So we really stripped down to the essence of, the inspiration was John Cassavetes films and the Dogma films and of like Lars von Trier, which is like, fuck all the artifice, fuck all the trucks, fuck all the stuff. Let the actors act. Let them do 7 takes in a row without cutting. Who cares? There's no rules. And actors loved it. Actors just loved not having
Is
marks.
that all single camera or was that multiple cameras?
Sometimes we'd have 4, sometimes we'd have 1. It
Okay.
depended. But the idea was let's just go make a movie cheap and let's go make a movie where the system is not telling you, well, you can't make it and who's in it. I mean, you have to kind of live here and live through the dailiness of how difficult it is chasing actors to be in your movies to get your movies financed. It really sucks. So the way that you can empower yourself is just to make the budget low enough, get some actors in it that can, that you think you can make your money back or come close to it. And I Melt with You, I lost a shitload of money because you make a dark 2-hour and 20-minute film about 4 white guys that kill themselves. Well, that's like commercial suicide, right? And went on relative terms of somebody looking at the project. It's like, who's going to go see that? Who's going to go see that movie in a theater? Well, sure enough, not many people saw it in the theater when it came out, but that's the great thing about streaming and DVD and stuff. It's like movies have a long life. Who knows? I still get letters about that movie and it's almost 10 years old. I still get impassioned letters about that film.
I've got a certain connection with it. It's kind of comical because I knew the movie was coming out for all my friends to go see this, and it was right before my bachelor party. It had an impact. It moved people that we still talk about it nowadays, and so that's the one thing is that I've noticed your body work.
You're the audience for that film.
Your films make you think differently. It moves you, whether you're uncomfortable at the topics. How do you prepare for these films, knowing that some of the content is somewhat heavy? I mean, do you like working on films that get you out of your comfort zone? I mean, what exactly speaks to you?
I mean, I Melt with You is really dark. Years later, the last film I did the last film I did was called Survive, which was for the Quibi app. Before that, I did this film Nostalgia, also the opposite of I'm Out With You, very dark and very sad, but very slow. And I did that just to like do something like that. Before it was kind of a comedy drama that I did as a challenge to myself to do something tonally quite different, even though the subject matter was ultimately, about death. I was able to approach it from a different place and work with Shirley MacLaine and Amanda Seyfried to just, I like the story. I have a part of me that has a big sentimental heart and stuff like that. So you do those movies and you realize like what you're good at and what you're not. Like, I don't think mixing comedy and drama is necessarily my forte, but all the thrillers that I've tried to get going or be assigned to have not happened. So what do? You don't sit around and like wait for years. Next thing you know, you're going to be old, and people who wait 7 years between movies, like, Jesus fucking Christ, like let's go make something.
Yeah.
And they also learn to not be so precious about it. So every movie is a challenge. Every movie is a different part of you. The goal is just make them and try different things and just have a body of work behind you that, like right now, if I had my dream, I've got like 6 movies I want to make. If I could just say, here's 6 years, go make 6 movies, I'd be happy. I'd be, and now I don't think I'll probably get to make all 6. It's not completely up to me, because it's not like somebody's giving me even, here's $20 million, $25 million to go do 6 movies. If I did, that would be my dream.
Yeah.
But so that's the battle. You got to prioritize, and you work on all of them. They're all your children.
You mentioned something at Quibi. You've worked on so many different formats. What do you prefer? So you got Instagram, 30 seconds, 60 seconds or less. What is your ideal format to work in? Is it long format, short?
I'm agnostic at this point. It doesn't really, they're so different. There's not one thing that I prefer. And those boundaries of time are opening up. I just made something and it was like 14 minutes, and you're realizing like it's hard to find. There's like a no man's land. You make a 20-minute short film and it's like, oh, like where do these things get seen? Half of it's distribution.
Yeah.
Just posting it on my Facebook page isn't enough. You got to be like, where does this stuff get seen? How do you distribute it? How do you see these things? Like half the people didn't even know about Quibi. My friends, like, oh, I heard about it. And then who's going to go buy the app? Who's going to watch it? Then they realize, wait, people want to watch stuff more than just their phone. And then they had all this content come out, and you're like, so your movie kind of gets lost, and you go spend like 8 months of your life on it, and you're proud of it, and you're like, well, at least it's going to get released as a movie at some point down the road. The full movie version will come out, but then just look at the world. There's so much content. There's so much, there's so much stuff out there. So in a way, you're like, who cares? Just go make something and hope to get the next one. Pay your bills, take care of your family, do your work. I think that's pretty much what it comes down to for everybody.
You mentioned different films, different formats. You also talked about a past film about shooting on a 5D. Is there any kind of preference in the equipment that goes in? I mean, nowadays everything you could shoot on 4K, 6, 8K. I think there's even 12K. Does it matter the format? It's just is it more about telling the story?
Shooting on this, shooting on a big beast. We shot the Quibi thing on this red monster, which was 8K because we had to do a lot of repositioning. To me, it's not about format. Obviously, the more resolution you have, but sometimes it's too clean and you want to beat it up and make it look shittier. It all depends on what you're going for. It comes down to like really, for like aspect ratio. So if the old days 235, right, 235 film, but now everything's square on Instagram, and like Quibi was like, do you shoot like this or do you shoot like vertical? I mean, you can't shoot everything, right?
Yeah.
So if you shoot people square and put them in the middle, all right, that's less challenging than playing with the 235 frame. And you got to shift gears. You got to. In the old days, it used to be you'd shoot one way and protect for something else, right? Now it's like, where's this thing going to be seen on the phone, on the big screen? I don't know. I used to, for years at MTV, you were 4:3. You were a box. Then it expands to 16:9. Then you do your first movie in a widescreen. You're like, it changes your whole idea of composition. You watch movies on widescreen. You study them. You look at composition. You look at paintings differently. You look at buildings differently. You take pictures and you expand your visual muscle. And you're like, wow, that's a good 235 shot versus boop. You look at it, that's a great vertical shot. So it's all, you have to adjust to the image and the release, and sometimes you mix them all up, you mix them all in.
Well, I'm kind of curious. Is there any work that you feel that, if you can go back and start finessing some film or some things that were in standard def and bring it to HD, is there anything that you think would resonate now that would be a little bit more relevant now? Is there any passion projects or any projects that you think you could revisit?
I just, when I took a lot of stuff on my website now, I mean, there's only a certain physical capability in terms of the resolution that you could take old material into the new realm, like other than going to like the Jeremy thing when they took it to like the super high end, like remaster and, digitally, but like, the money to do that costs a lot of money. To go back and color correct old stuff. I remember one time, it was maybe 2013, and this is when the transition from film to digital, and you started noticing like, the commercials had that, like, I call it like the iPhone aesthetic, and it was soft and flares, and you're like, it was all handheld, and like, everything was very like, looks like an iPhone commercial, and and then you look at directors' reels and commercial reels, and like everything starts to look the same. And I remember one company said, "Oh, well, your work is so stylized. We want it to be more natural," meaning like old stuff that was about shot on film was considered too stylized, and they wanted more of a neo-realist kind of approach, which is just like anybody could take their camera and wave it around. So in a way, my reel, I remember I had to, when I joined a new commercial company, you kind of have to adjust and build up your reel so it feels current, Yet I still look at some old stuff, and sure enough, then people start getting into retro, and it's like, I remember I did a music video 2 years ago, and there was like a review online. It said, "Oh, I don't know. It feels so 90s. It's ripping off 90s techniques." I'm like, dude, I did those techniques in the 90s. Like, I'm not ripping myself off. So those become like then the techniques that people want to use. And you're like, Jesus Christ, just full circle. That's why I've never thrown away any of my film cameras or even analog cameras or anything, and you mix it up. And so I think when people look at my body of work, there's an emotional, intellectual, and visual approach to everything from 10 seconds to 2 hours. And that's my taste. That's what I'm drawn to. Those are ideas I'm drawn to.
Yeah.
That's what I decide. How do I spend my time?
That's how I was very fortunate enough for a car company recently that said, "Hey, we want to do something vintage." And I was like, I've got a Super 16 camera. Let's do this. Oh my God, I get to break this out and use this. And everything that, when it was transferred over, I was like, it's exactly what I envisioned in my mind's eye. into this spot. And you know, to kind of go back, you know, I wish I never threw out certain cameras, like my beta camera. You know, there's certain things that it just, I don't know, I wish I had, you know, my old Canon XLR1s. You know, I've got plenty of mini DV cam tapes laying around, digibeta
I've got
tapes.
them. I've got
Yeah,
them all. But you know what? When there's apps now that let you give something a vintage VHS and mini DV look, that shit's pretty great. Like
it
I
is.
would much rather. I just did a spot and we applied a bunch of filters to it and made it feel like that, which was a lot more. It was a lot easier than me digging out my old cameras. Although on a certain quality, you know, each one's different. I didn't have the time or money to shoot on mini DV and up-res it and all the stuff to edit. I just didn't have the resources to do it.
Yeah.
You know,
That's
but on something else, on a movie, if I wanted to use old flashbacks, I'd use my old cameras.
and I think this is kind of maybe this the old man in me analog, I guess the blend of analog and digital. But you know, I've had friends, colleagues like, oh, I shot this on the iPhone, did everything in app, and the best thing was I edited in the phone and I delivered this piece, and I'm like, I want to say fuck you to them because I'm like, I've got invested all this post production and you delivered something, and what?
You should adapt, and you should realize it's neither a condemnation of them or, you know, it should empower you to say, okay, I can do it cheaper or faster, or it's still an eye. You still have to frame something. You still have to come up with the image.
Yeah.
So the thing that people don't remember is like this or this, or whatever. It's just a capture device. All it is a capture device. All it is capturing data to be manipulated, to be done. So
Well, that's why I say I'm going to start, you know, showing my age here. I've done things nowadays where it's just like, it's like, wow. I mean, I remember getting trained on, you know, linear editing, and now, you know, to edit certain things, it's so quick and painless that I'm like, I love technology. I've embraced it. I've had to make my living through that. And that's what, you know, working remotely isn't second nature to me, you know? So that's why, you know, with people dealing with COVID and working from home, I'm like, I've embraced this prior. So that's why, you know, I ask you this. Have you been working remotely prior to COVID? Have you had that kind of infrastructure set up?
well, no, I never worked remotely. I mean, I'm doing a documentary now, but like, I still sent a crew to, I mean, we shot in Dublin and New York, and I'm still sending a crew, a guy with a camera, um, because I'd rather have that quality than the Zoom quality.
Yeah.
Well, there's a couple of other interviews coming up that I'm just going to record the Zoom, because ultimately it's a collage, and I know how to make it look interesting. You know, so like that's the biggest, it's more like, what are people saying? I don't fixate on, especially on an interview, like who cares, you know, as long as but it made the subjects more comfortable to have a camera there. Do you know what I mean? They didn't want to be like, it felt like a real film if they were being shot with a camera more than like doing a Zoom interview. So, I mean, you can only do so much remotely. You know, these like, oh, I want to do a Zoom show. Like, boy, if this is our reality forever, I haven't bought that yet. They're like, this is the way the world is now, and we're forever shut down, and the masks and shut down, and no more movie theaters, and no more concerts, and no more, or film shoots become this like antiseptic. Like I'll be 60 years old and say, fuck it, I'm done.
Well, that's a prior to this interview. I've had other directors on the show, and that's a, you know, I'm like, is this the death of cinema? Wearing masks, you know, during production on site on studios, I have a feeling is going to be here to stay for a while.
For a while. There was a
Yeah.
great article in the New York Times about that. Like, look, sound, oh, movies, forget it. There's sound in movies. Movies are over. Color, oh my God, color, forget it. The movies are going to be over. Nobody wants color in movies. TV, oh, TV is going to take away. movies, cinema has survived. It'll survive this. It'll adapt. It'll change. Yeah, people. It's easier for people to watch at home certain things.
Well,
Like I've accepted that now. It's like people might watch it. You can't hold on to like, I only want it to be seen in the theater. Of course, it's better to be seen in the theater. Do you know what I mean? Of course. But I get letters from people that saw my Shirley MacLaine film on a boat. And like, I got the greatest letter from these women. They're like, we were on a cruise and we saw your movie. Great. I've been on a plane in first class in a plane and walked around, night lights are off and seen 3 people watching my movie. And you're like, okay, who cares? So if they're watching on a plane like this, like in a way, viewing it is more important than where they view it.
all your various bodies of work, what would you say as far as the one film that, or the one project that stands out that you're proud of?
But I think in general, like a movie like Arlington Road has lasted. It's also like one of the oldest ones I made, but it'll be in my New York Times obit. More people saw and will remember Arlington Road than Nostalgia or The Last Word, because more people saw it. It was a bigger movie. It was a bigger release. So really, movies like that and Mothman hold up really well. And the other ones that were smaller that barely got seen, I'm sure there's people who don't even know that I made them, but it doesn't matter. I like them all. And, but Arlington Road, that holds up,
And that's to wrap this up, because I know you're precious for time. What kind of legacy do you feel like you've impacted on the film industry, TV, music industry?
I don't think people could really like be that aware of themselves to, become privately over time. There's been enough. I've gotten tons of recognition, and also I've gotten eviscerated by critics and ripped to shreds. So you're humble. The greatest legacy is I feel grateful to have had a body of work. I'd say this maybe around 5-6 years ago, when I was about 52, that I started to feel like, wow, there was enough of a body of work that I could look at the body of work and feel proud of it. There's still a lot of stuff I'd like to make. I haven't gotten in the world of movies where I'd like to get to. And I don't think, whereas I'm pretty proud in music videos and commercials and even TV with kind of like what I've done. But there's still some bigger things I'd like to do. But again, like you ask a football player, ask an artist, ask anybody, like I'm more proud of my legacy as a father than I am as a filmmaker. Do you know what I mean? Like so I make stuff, and now I'm more happy that Syracuse University is going to take my papers and my archive. So I feel like, oh my God, at least it will be there. With this like stuff in the cloud, you're like, where's my shit going to go? It's on my website. Where's it going to go? In 50 years, where will somebody be able to study my works?
Yeah.
Like who knows where that stuff's going to be? So unless somebody's actually doing it and preserving it.
Your documentary films that you've made, especially about Alzheimer's, watching that documentary and other documentaries, it educated, it created such an impact. So that's why I threw that out there, is that, your documentary work has really changed things.
I'm very honored. I'm very honored if you can, and there's other young filmmakers that I know that I've influenced and that I've mentored, and that's a nice feeling. Do you know what I mean? So if they got off in the work and it inspired them, that's great. The same way that like Steven Soderbergh is like one of my idols. You know what I mean? Like, so when he like gives me advice, like on I Melt With You, he goes, you got to will a movie into happening. Wow. Like, it's like, if he hadn't said that, I probably wouldn't have just jumped over the bridge and made the movie. Yeah. So, we all have to be inspired by wherever we can, in art, in politics, and in our world. Like, what makes you get out of bed in the morning and say, oh, I want to do this? So, I constantly have like stuff I've clipped out from other people or quotes to inspire me to say, all right, what am I going to do today? What am I going to work on? And just, that's what it's about. You know what I mean? So you do the work and you leave the body of work behind and your relationships, and you just like, okay, you do the best you can at every one time. So, you just don't stop and then be like, I'm done, and you don't make that decision.
So I'm kind of itching for 2021 to happen. And, I think myself, as well as others out there, we're curious about your work and can't wait to see it. So
Let's get over this virus, man.
Yeah, no, I'm over it. I'm so
I hear you. So stay safe and stay in touch.
You got it, Mark. Thank you again for your time. Take care.
See you later.
It's a pleasure.
Thanks, Brian.